Welcome to our World Environment Day special 2023. Today's episode features Becky McLean, Head of Sustainability at Sweco, and is hosted by Dougal Driver, our World Environment Day lead. Join us as we delve deeper into the impact of plastic pollution and explore the ways we can all contribute towards creating a sustainable future.
Hi Becky, nice to see you. Yeah, it's World Environment Day is coming around again, and it's really good to interview you in and around World Environment Day. And the theme, not for the first time, is around plastic pollution. Really important. As you know, I'm the Vice Chairman of the Society for the Environment and a proud chartered environmentalist. But tell me a little bit more about your background and what you do in the environmental field.
My name's Becky McLean and I'm a Director of Sustainability for Sweco. In the UK, we've got about 1,400 staff, ranging from engineers to environmental consultants and sustainability experts, decarbonisation, the usual things you'd expect to see. I've got over 20 years experience in environmental consultancy, and I was actually trained as an air quality consultant when I graduated university. I then had this amazing boss who inspired a lot of my career, actually. And she was an air quality consultant, but also a specialist in environmental impact assessment. So I suppose I followed her path, if you like. And I spent a lot of my time becoming an environmental impact assessment coordinator and a lead on large infrastructure and energy projects, delivering large EIAs for various different types of projects across the UK. But I suppose the reason I got into this whole industry, even though I didn't know environmental consultants existed when I did my degree, was that I've always, and I always have a real passion for making a difference. And I think the environmental world is growing at a pace just now, and that recognition of the fact and the importance of environment really in everything that we do is really growing, which I love. So I think sustainability has been a natural career progression for me, as I can kind of draw all the different threads together from people and planet and profit and try and kind of knit them together to try and make an even greater difference.
Yeah. Oh, fascinating. And it's isn't it a great business to be in if it's a business, because it feels a privilege sometimes to work in the sector, doesn't it? But it's certainly a growing sector, and problems, if you like, that really challenge the world they're not going away quickly. Some are getting worse. It's interesting. The theme this year is plastic pollution, and it's been a theme in previous years, or marine plastic in particular, oceans, and it all links back to. Possibly it's a bit of a cliche around plastic, but it is obviously the root of several damaging things that are going on. What was your thought when you saw that was a theme again in 2023, where you would hope maybe we were on top of that problem?
I talk quite a lot about the forgotten environmental issues, right? So carbon's really interesting. Everyone's on board with carbon. And there's some really key issues that when I started in environmental consultancy, they were the big key topics, and they were waste, and they were water, and they were contaminated land. And they don't get talked about as much anymore, but we haven't solved them in any way. But they're not exciting, right? So everyone just expects, and I think for me, this is the critical point of a lot of our environmental issues, plastic as well. Everyone thinks it's somebody else's responsibility to sort it. So we all benefit from it. We all benefit from single-use plastic. We all benefit from it when we're traveling, and you can't get a water fill-up point, so you go and buy a plastic bottle of water. We benefit from it if you're ill and you're in hospital. We benefit, there's 100 different ways we all benefit from single-use plastic, but I think I'm safe to say we're all appalled when we realise that there's microplastics now in all the food that we eat, and they're in all our oceans, and we don't want that to happen. But we seem to expect that somebody else would solve it. So I'm not surprised, albeit I am slightly disappointed that we haven't solved it.
Yeah. I mean, it's an amazing material, isn't it? I mean, it's it does do things for us that other materials can't do. I mean, I'm into trees, woods, and forests, so forest products and timber and wood as an alternative to plastic quite often, and trying to work out ways that wood can even be like plastic, because plastic is such an amazing material. But surely there's some places where we have to continue to use it, whether it's single use or not.
Well, and I think this is where I think the key question for me is not, let's ban all plastics, because I don't think we can keep the standard of living. I don't think we can actually look after ourselves as well if we don't have any plastic in the world. But I think this is where we need to stop looking at design processes in a linear fashion. Like, I would start at the recycling or reuse point and then work back from there. So really embed circular economy. So I think I would hope that there'll be new innovation that comes up where, and I know there are some already, where you get dissolvable plastics made from seaweed materials and things, but we don't have them at the scale that we need them just now. So my hope in the future is that they get the investment to really upscale at pace that we need them to. But I think there's a fundamental question here for humanity about how do we use our resources and how do we value them. So when you go and buy that bottle of juice, a plastic bottle of juice for £1.20 or 30 or whatever it is now, that's not what it's cost the environment, and that's not what it's going to cost the environment to dispose of it and use it 3 or 4 times and then you chuck it out again. And there's a lot of interesting stats about the amount of carbon in glass bottles, for instance. So I've had conversations with people that have said, yeah, but glass is far worse than plastic for carbon in terms of the materials needed to create it. But the fact that you can reuse it a lot more is the key thing. And this is about societal change, isn't it? So when I lived in the Netherlands back in 2001 or 2, I think, when I was studying over there at university for a short time, they had a bottle return system.
Yeah.
And that was over 20 years ago. And that was just expected. And if you bought a 6-pack of beer, you took the 6-pack of beer back to the shop and you got money off your next 6-pack of beer. So it was just accepted. It was just a way to, so we know how to do it. We know what to do, but it is going to take some brave decisions and it is going to cost people and companies money to do it, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, do you feel more responsible as a professional environmentalist? Do you feel a little bit more weight on your shoulders, and is that fair? And if so, how do you value the importance of being qualified in the sector in order to make that difference in the world and in society?
I think we hold ourselves to quite a high standard, don't we? So,
yeah.
But we're still human, and we still live in this society that's set up in a certain way. But I feel guilty when I give my kids snacks to take to school and they're all wrapped up in plastic. And I know that the school doesn't have proper recycling facilities, so it's likely they'll just go in the bucket and then they'll go to landfill.
I wonder sometimes whether it's hard to be positive because people who aren't in the sector and can't make a difference in their work might feel completely helpless. I mean, how can somebody who isn't in this sector affect the oceans, which is just in itself just so big and so difficult. It's such a huge concept.
I think it's such a big question. I get asked it quite a lot, actually, and from colleagues and from friends. But like, what can I do? Like, if there are huge companies out there polluting our rivers and seas and stuff, and can an individual? So if I took a stand against a certain company and said I am no longer buying their products because I know they pollute the rivers in Africa or something. Now, that company is very likely not going to care very much, are they? However, if we work together in a movement and say, actually, this is not acceptable, we don't agree with this, and therefore we would like to boycott your products until you get your house in order. Depending on the scale that you could organise it on, that could have quite significant impacts on that. And I think we forget that we have huge amount of power in what we buy.
Yes.
So every time we buy something, we are voting with our feet, if you
Yes.
like, to say your environmental practices are okay because I'm going to buy that. So I think reminding people that they have huge economic power actually in their choice and consumerism is the key thing. But I think we have to recognise that these big companies have huge responsibilities to us because we are the planet. They aren't doing it to the planet, they are doing it to us as well. So really simple things people can do in terms of choosing their energy providers, maybe moving their pension. We were having a big discussion with colleagues yesterday about ethical banking. Can you move your bank? I think this is part of being a citizen, citizenship, right? You can't change the world, but you can control these small things. I
noticed that the financial world, to do with corporates around the world, now they're looking at nature disclosures as part of the sort of front end of reporting on their accounts. And I think that sounds to me, and from what I've seen, it's a little bit like carbon, where they need to account for their impact on nature. I think companies might, whether they want to or not, might have to go down more of this route. And I think we've got to watch for how that plays out into what they invest in, and whether it's an excuse to carry on doing what they're doing and offset it a bit like carbon. So I'd like your views on that. But I'd like to take you also into the fact that you didn't mention government and policymakers and regulators within. You talked about business, which is fair enough. So a little comment on nature declarations in businesses, but also, we also vote. You literally use the word vote with your feet, but we can vote at elections. Let's not make this a political debate, and let's not make this just about Britain, but about the world as well.
I think they're two really interesting points. I'll pick up very lightly on the political side of things.
Wise.
I think going back to my very early comment about the fact that we're kind of expecting, or we think it's somebody else's responsibility to solve this. My own very personal view, not Sweco's, is I think if we wait for the governments to really lead the way, they are in such turmoil just now for 101 different reasons that I don't think they're being the leaders that I would want them to be. And I think there is such a strong lobbying element across the world that I'm not sure how impartial they are. And if we bring this to the plastic debate, plastic is a product of oil, isn't it? So there's huge money and profit involved in plastic from oil and the various different industries that are associated with it. And it's so complex that I think if we wait for governments to do it, I think we need to lead the charge. And also, but I would 100% support your point there that we vote for them. And this is part of citizenship. And it always amazes me how many people don't vote. Now, I know that you might not trust any of them and you might not see which ones are the best. Other political parties are available, but you have a citizen responsibility here to be part of our society, part of our UK, part of our global community, to try and select politicians who will do the best for us and for our world, I think.
Well, it's world. We're talking about World Environment Day. We're talking about the world here, and regimes are different around the world. Chartered environmentalists exist around the world and operate in many other countries, and I think we've got a role to play there in not badgering, but influencing and educating and taking people in providing solutions for these things. I think there's in my timber world, I always try and think of sustainable supply chains with timber, which there are certifications for that. It's a renewable resource, and I think about how timber and wood can replace plastics. I've used wooden earbuds, and they tend to break a little bit more than plastic ones, but that's way less annoying than having to use something I don't really want to use.
I think though as well, because I've been using like the bamboo toothbrushes and things, but our waste streams are still not set up to then recycle these either. So I think one of the problems is that these eco products that are available, which are great, I think there's people get quite cynical about them because they're like, well, okay, I've used this, but I'm still just having to turf it in the bin because there isn't a place I can go. And there's some amazing initiatives out there. So John Lewis, other shops are available, but you can take your shampoo bottle. If you go and take 5 empty plastic products to John Lewis, you'll get £5 off what you buy.
No, I didn't know about that.
Boots have got the same. Boots have got a recycling centre in some of their stores. If you go on their websites, it'll tell you which ones you can take them to. Yeah. But they're not very well publicised.
You made me think about influencing. You said something earlier about, we're citizens and it's our society, we can have an influence. I'm quite a believer in dropping a note to the CEO of an organisation, thinking about the shareholders who might be who might be on a board, a non-exec, maybe a non-exec on a board, dropping them a note. Also, if there's any kind of feedback that can be done or reviews, to use those. Do you see value in doing that as well? The sort of drip effect as a user of their product.
Absolutely. I think we assume other people will tell them, but they don't. And that's whether that's a CEO of big companies or whether that is politicians. Your local elected MSP is effectively representing you in Parliament or representing you in the political sphere. So you have 100% the right to email them and say, actually, in your election pledge, you promised to do whatever, and I haven't seen any evidence of this. So I would like you to respond to me and tell me exactly what you're going to do. Now, that is only one letter, but if that lands in their desk and that's something that's fallen off their to-do list, which they're human, it's easily enough done, that might be enough to put that right back at the top of their to-do list. And I think CEOs are possibly in the types of positions, they don't receive as much feedback as maybe other members of organisations because they have very different roles to play.
Yeah.
So my mum always told me never ever to be intimidated by people's roles, status. They were like, they're just somebody else's mum or dad or brother or uncle or auntie or whatever, and they sit in a certain position. But
absolutely,
you're allowed a
view.
She's
not wrong, and she's not wrong. I think your comment to somebody or your feedback might be the straw. That just changes. It might be well timed. It might be just the ultimate point where a business can make a decision. Let's face it, it's not always easy for businesses. It might be more expensive, more complex, might not have the skills. We've always done it this way and we're successful. And it's all things that we hear all the time.
When you think about history as well, there's certain people in history that have changed history by doing quite small acts, but probably took quite a lot of courage. So like Rosa Parks sitting on that bus in the white section. Now, that transformed. There's still a lot of work to do, but that was one small act by somebody who was exceptionally brave. But people can change history. People can come up and completely change things. And I think the thing that we don't talk about in sustainability enough is that citizenship, is that responsibility that we've all got. And anybody sat in their work in any industry. So we delivered some sustainability training to a large computer games company, and anybody sat in any organisation at any level can ask a question, and the question can simply be, can we do this better?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we sometimes forget that people who work in governments and in corporations have families and friends, and they're part of the community as well. So, there's plenty of messaging there that you can work on. Tell me, just jumping back into your daily life a little bit and your work, tell me something that's exciting you that might be in your in tray at the moment or just around the corner, to do with the environment, and maybe something that's frustrating you as well.
So I went to an event last week. It was the Wild Isles event that, David Attenborough, the series that he's released. RSPB and WWF have created a series of films from that series on the impact on nature for business. And they'd held a big event in Edinburgh and it was so inspiring. But the thing that really stuck in my head was only 4% of businesses in the UK have a biodiversity plan. 90% of them have a carbon plan.
Yeah.
Now, you can't pick those things apart. Like,
No.
we can count all the carbon we want, right? But if we get to net zero and we've not got any biodiversity, then we won't have enough food. We won't have clean waters and rivers. We won't have, we won't really survive, right? So after that event, I went and spoke at the Sweco Sustainability Council in the UK, and I put forward a proposal that I'm going to write them a biodiversity plan within the next month or so. Everyone approved. I shouldn't have said a month, should I? God knows what's going to happen. Everyone approved. I've managed to get our head of biodiversity. He's really, really keen as well, and some other colleagues who are really, really, really interested and knowledgeable about this. And everyone's really for it. So it's not going to be perfect. I'm sure I'll get some things wrong, but we'll have something, and we'll have something that we can work on. So that's making me really proud.
Well, that will help with the Task Force for Nature Disclosures, etc., etc. These declarations that businesses have to make. You'll be ahead of the game. I hope it won't be the first or the last. Measuring the impact of that will be interesting, won't it? Holding the business to account, of course. That's when it gets crunchy. But you're right. There's just huge crossovers to everything else. What about something that mentioning no names, but frustrates you sitting in your in tray at the moment? Something that's you just can't get. Just isn't going where you need it to go to.
I think one of the things that I think is quite difficult when we are trying to embed sustainability in everything that we do is that a lot of our clients are really hand-tied by quite short budgetary cycles. That have got quite short-term views, or they were maybe set 2 years ago and the world was very different 2 years ago, or they've got a real focus, or they are judged on the capital spend. So when you're trying to recommend and suggest, and I would say a lot of our clients are massively switched on and know a lot about these things, so you're having really interesting discussions with them about ways of doing things differently and innovation, and could we trial that? There's a lot of blockers still about actually getting those on the ground, and part of it is to do with risk. So there's a lot of really cool products out there, but they're fairly small scale, or they haven't been tested. And quite rightly, particularly public sector clients, they can't take on that amount of risk sometimes in terms of spending the public purse. So that seems to me, we know we need to really decarbonise at pace and scale. And we've got all these amazing innovative products here. And we've got clients that want to do things differently. And everybody, I think, is on the decarbonisation bus now, pretty much. But the procurement processes or the budgetary processes that are in place are still quite a blocker to that. And even simple things, I was talking to somebody about retrofitting some buildings and repurposing them rather than demolition, etc., because materials are so expensive, they're hard to come by, blah, blah, blah. But the steel structure of a building is only insured to a certain point, and then it's uninsurable.
Yeah.
So there's these things that I think we could really solve.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned agility, I think, and consistency, and they're actually opposing things, aren't they? Because you want consistency of like long-term policies. I mean, I revert back to my core industry, forestry. Well, it takes decades and decades and lifetimes to and you need consistency in order to get somewhere. But the agility, the ability to respond and react is also important. It's quite a challenge.
But
it sounds like you've got to mix your environmental skills with almost business management skills in order to make a change with your clients.
Absolutely. And I think the frustration is we've seen that it can happen with COVID. Things changed overnight. There was a hospital constructed in the Glasgow SECC within a week.
Yeah.
So we can do it if the political will is there. So I think that goes back to this point about we have a role in lobbying the government. One of the other slight frustrations I've got just now is to do with the new changes or proposed changes to the environmental outcomes report. And I think going back to your point about, so that there's a proposal to reform EIA and SEA, the framework in England. But I think going back to your point about agility and consistency, we tend to do this thing where we think there's a slight issue here or things could be improved, and we throw absolutely everything out the window and we start again.
Yeah.
Now, to achieve agility and consistency, I think you have to have a really strong lessons learned from all the work that you've done, because there's a wealth of information in there, and it sometimes doesn't need a wholeheartedly chuck out the window, but you could achieve much greater outcomes by quite small tweaks and just keep tweaking it. So,
I mean, this is why we need the experts that we represent, isn't it, from the society? Because you need, in order to do that, it feels to me things are thrown out because people don't understand the nuances.
Yeah.
What you're describing there is expertise, isn't it? Professional expertise. Who said, no, that's good. Let's just nuance it. Leave that alone.
Keep changing the dial, but this bit, but maybe what about if we just trialed? And I think the way our regulations are set, they don't allow for trials and pilots of things in the same way. Our world is quite risk averse, and there's a lot of lawyers and legal, and quite rightly.
A lot of scrutiny, a lot of scrutiny over every, people, innovative, novel approaches are maybe not always well received. I'm just going to come to a couple of initiatives that are relevant to the World Environment Day, and then I'll come back to you for some final thoughts on the theme for this year and what we as a society can do about it, as in the Society of the Environment, and also society more widely. So I'll do that after just mentioning a couple of initiatives. I'm sure links will come up on either connected to the podcast or through the website. The Global Tourism Plastics Initiative, which unites the tourism sector behind a common vision to address the root causes of plastic pollution. I mean, we're all a little bit more aware of sustainability when we're professionals, when we go on holiday, aren't we? I think you talked about your kids going to school. I'm really much more aware when I travel and I'm in another country, which may be wrong, but it's a fact. New Plastics Economy Global Commitment in 2018, UNEP joined forces with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation on the global commitment to the new plastics economy. That's worth looking up. Sounds interesting. I've seen some of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation aspects, and they're certainly very. They can relate. It relates to a lot of the ways we've described things, and the Clean Seas campaign, which sort of does what it says on the tin. So the metal tin, which can be recycled, not the plastic tin. So with that, Becky, I'm going to just come back to you with some final thoughts. Tell me what the future. Let's have a bright look forward to the future, whether it's from your own perspective or perhaps from the wider perspective, what you'd like to be talking about in a few years' time if we did this again.
Well, I think we always talk about, reaching net zero and what is that vision, right? What does that look like? What is it we're all striving to do here? Whether you work for consultancy or the government or, and I think it's worth just taking 5 minutes every now and again to remind yourself that if we get to that utopian effect, it's all about putting our lives back in balance. So we will use the amount of resources that we've got available to us in a fair manner that provides us with a standard of living that we are all comfortable with. And I think this is the bit that's the big challenge, because people are 100% behind a lot of these initiatives and looking after environment. But when you start talking about changing their lifestyles or making quite hard decisions, they tend not to. So I think just now we are very out of balance with our world. And if we can really drive decarbonisation, and I mean not just carbon, I mean restoring our environment, restoring our ecosystems, cleaning up our seas, really sorting out our waste. I think if we sort out our waste streams properly, a lot of things would get better, because we're going to need those materials effectively going forward. So it's about balance. Let's strive for balance and not perfection. We're never going to reach perfection because we're human, and humans make things more complicated, but it also makes life more exciting. But just constantly moving the dial, and hopefully we will get there. And we are amazingly resilient as a kind of species. But I think we all need to be pulling together in the same way, and really making sure that everybody gets brought along with us as well. And, people aren't left behind.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I think that last point, I think we do have a responsibility as those that maybe know a little bit more than some to interpret that into a way and not hector and lecture, but actually make these decisions easier for people. Thank you so much for your time today. It's been great talking to you.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed having a right good chat about everything. And I think it's great that we've got the Society for the Environment. I have to say, as a chartered member, it really holds a good strong place, I think, in the industry. And it would be great to see that kind of growing and possibly more lobbying of these governments, as we're talking about, to really make a change.
Thanks, Becky. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for watching. To learn more about World Environment Day or environmental professional registration, please visit our website.